I'm going to go through the elements real fast because we know what they are, but I want to point out to you that the point that you need a separate body of evidence. You take physical pain and suffering. Now, we'll put that up on we'll get in our war room, we'll put up on the chalkboard, we'll put physical pain and suffering. And under that, we'll put every bit of evidence that we have, just on that one element. We put lay testimony. What witnesses do we have on physical pain and suffering, and what will they say? What is the amount, the quantity, and the quality of their evidence? Then we'll take documentary evidence. What documents do we have? Medical records that will substantiate an award for physical pain and suffering. What demonstrative evidence do we have that will support physical pain and suffering? And then we talk about creating additional demonstrative evidence, and we're going to talk about that substantially here shortly. But then we talk about, now, what expert witnesses do we have? So lay testimony, expert testimony, documentary evidence, and demonstrative evidence, and we put it all up on the board. Then we move on to the next element. The defense has a tendency to talk about pain and anguish as if it were one element of damage. There's all the difference in the world in physical pain and suffering and mental anguish. And you should make a concerted effort to separate those two. You should produce your evidence separately, and you should argue your damages separately. One argument for physical pain, a separate argument for each one of the elements of damage that you can support in a closing argument. So I'll give you an example of this. I handled a case many years ago, tragic case. Young couple on their honeymoon. They were driving along the border on the American side, just across from Mexico. There's a lot of open fields out there where they were harvesting crops. And they're driving along this 2-lane highway, and all of a sudden this harvester, they swing the equipment around just in time that it protrudes out into their lane, no time to react, and it took the roof right off the car. And the car went into a spin, and by the time it stopped, the young driver, who had been a medic in Vietnam, he was sitting there frozen like this. He couldn't move. He had no movement in anything. He's holding on to the steering wheel. He's got all kind of pain, but he's holding on to the steering wheel, and he can't move. Finally, he manages to get some movement in his right arm. Now, he's got all kinds of pain. He has 2 broken scapulae. He has a broken leg, and he is frozen in place. He thinks he obviously has a neck injury, but he thinks he's quadriplegic. That's mental anguish. That's mental anguish. He's got a broken leg. That's physical pain. But then he reaches up, and he knows not to try to move his head because he thinks he's got a broken neck. But instead, he reaches up and grabs his shirt with the only thing he can move, which is his hand, and he pulls himself around like this, his whole body around till he can see his wife, who's been decapitated. That's mental anguish. See the difference? So you need a body of proof on each one of those. Now, physical disfigurement, physical impairment, which is disability, bystander mental anguish, these are the elements that you can look into. Loss of society and companionship, loss of consortium. We have these as a checklist, and we use this checklist on every case, every personal injury case we get. We run it down the checklist, and you'll be surprised how often you find, whoops, I had forgotten about that. So, and the checklist is available in your paper. Loss of damage to wage earning capacity. I hear a lot that, well, he doesn't have any damage to wage earning capacity because he's making more money now than he was before he was injured. That's not the test. There's wage loss, but then there's wage earning capacity. So if he had a capacity to earn money before he was injured that he does not have now, something was injured that's reduced a capacity that he had to make money before, he has damage to wage earning capacity. Then there's wage loss. Then you go into medical expenses, pharmaceuticals. A lot of time you overlook pharmaceuticals. It's only $12 a week or whatever. Run that out over somebody that's going to have to take it for their entire life. Do a lifetime projection on pharmaceuticals. You'll be amazed at the amount of money it comes out to. Funeral expenses. And then you go into the other things. Personal property damage, cost of vehicle repairs, rental car, pre-impact terror is an element of damage, which we'll talk about, loss of chance of survival in some states. Attorney's fees. I'm amazed at the number of times that lawyers fail to plead attorney's fees where they might be available. Now, this is not in personal injury necessarily, but I've done a lot of cases that involve federal legislation. There are so many federal statutes that provide for attorney's fees if you breach them. But we had a statute in Texas, Article 3.62 of the Insurance Code, that said if someone dies and they're insured and you don't pay off the insurance coverage, you get a 60-day notice on it. You give them 60 days. If they don't pay you in 60 days, you're entitled to your attorney's fees, an 18% penalty, plus attorney's fees, plus prejudgment interest and post-judgment interest. I defended over 100 of those cases. And in maybe 10 cases, the lawyers working for the forces of evil. Then in maybe 10 of those cases, about 10%, the lawyers actually pled for all that money that can drive a $100,000 policy up to $225,000 or $230,000. All they had to do was plead it. But so look for these things. You have your consumer protections, contractual damages, bad faith, pre and post judgment interest, and punitive damages. Now, a lot of that won't do you any good at all unless you can find the coverage.